all its responsibilities, requirements to the best it can. And it does make it for very difficult decisions. At the federal level, things like Medicaid, they talk about that, never been talked about or touched. At the state level, the cuts at the universities and large cuts at the education and preschool, kindergarten, things that were always had to stay there. The most important decisions for that particular group are now on the table, and we find ourselves at the local level doing the same thing. And I know the mayor does have a difficult consideration, decision to make, along with the commissioner's administration, because when we talk about the city level, some of the most difficult decisions come into play. They involve our neighborhoods, our neighbors. They involve things like water and sewer, things that are absolutely required, things like fire and police. And to redeploy those or to make those kind of cuts, there's no easy way. You know, we can't cut the water, we need the water. We can't cut the sewer, that's got to be running. And then you look to the fire and police where it's at and what we can do to make it run more efficient. And they are very difficult, there's no doubt about that. At one time, and maybe Commissioner, you can correct me if I'm wrong, there was 11 fire stations in the city of Bethlehem at the high water mark. There were 11.
Yes.
Now we're between 4 and 5. So there's a great difference in that number, and we can go back and maybe check out the history when they went from 11 to 10. What kind of considerations? Was it all money? Or was it logistics? Or what other consolidations or efficiencies were made? From 11 to 10 to 10 to 7 or 7, and here we are looking at the number from 5 to 4 and the feasibility of doing it. There's numbers, there are data that show it can be done safely, but there are also considerations about safety that have to be weighed in on. And you know, somewhere in between that is where we need to end up. So it's not an easy decision. I know we play some part of that, although we're not the decision whether it's opening or closing. It doesn't rest here. So as much data as we saw, this is more than I got to see in the meetings we've had before. That does rest with the administration. We then need to pick up from that point on and decide where we go through the EMS, which also includes a number of decisions based on how the first decision is made and other options become available to us. And I don't know if we talk about the EMS, our thoughts on that now, or do we come back to
Keep going. Yeah, I'm just going to roll right through it.
Thoughts on EMS, I think we're all agreed the facility is not adequate, and that's where we're at. That's kind of our starting point. To go back from the council's perspective, where we control the decisions about what would happen with an EMS project. We go back to last budget season. The plan I put forward, there was a $20 million shortfall in the budget, if you recall, and 14 represented payables, which were pension payments and medical. $6 million on capital projects and purchases, the nuclear list that we narrowed down to from 12 million down to about 6 million projects that we felt need to be completed in the next couple of years. The option at that time was to borrow 20 million to cover that, those two groupings. At that time, council backed off and voted on a plan to borrow 16 million to pay the payables that needed to be taken care of, and to only cover $2 million in that borrowing of the $6 million in projects. That left us $4 million short. Part of the plan was to increase tax to $750,000 mil, which would generate $1 million. That would take care of our third $3 million. My plan was to keep that in place, not to increase again, but to keep that $750,000 mil in place, that which would represent another $1 million from the year 2012, would be $4 million. The $1 million that came in is in a lockbox. President Sanchez at that time proposed that we put that EMS money and the pumper money into a lockbox. We voted on that, and that's where that money sits, waiting to see what we decide and what kind of project moves forward. We also, in a budget meeting, cut $250,000 from line items, operating and training. We cut $250,000. We received $250,000 from Bedco, so that made up another $500,000, and it left us $1.5 million short of the projects that we decided needed to be done. We had $4.5 million in, $1.5 million short. What was not covered, and still not covered, is that 911 console, which is brought up by the administration tonight, and also some street overlays that were moved down on that list. As spring arrived, the EMS bids came in higher than anticipated, and we're quite short. You saw the numbers tonight. We looked at them. Director, about $500,000 short on the EMS, for the money we set aside for EMS to the project bids. Is that correct? So we're $1 million short on that. And we're looking at 5 options, and as a council, what we need to do is look at that. Number one, we're gonna save money more and put more money away to delay a project. Number two, we can cut back to some extent, and that's something we can continue to look at. 3, we can increase the tax, or 4, borrow more. I don't think any of those would have any kind of support. That rules out those options. 3 and 4, we move to option 5, and that would be the firehouse. If firehouse would stay open, I think the idea is, I think we need to move forward is cutting back on the project and looking at a smaller version of it. If the firehouse is consolidated, then I think we would look to go ahead and use that public building for a number of reasons, and that would be option number 5. If it is consolidated, it's a building, but it's well built, like many buildings years ago. Sometimes they're built better than today. If we build a new building, it would be a pole building, so there's not really a comparison there. I'd rather have a 50-year-old building than a pole building. The building has a new roof and windows, which represents investment that we could take advantage versus building a pole building. The renovations, the money saved was shown and presented to us, and the locations that was also presented to us also provide a substantial advantage from EMS versus one facility. What I would look for from council's perspective on if moving forward with EMS at Dewberry would be a significant investment in the center to see what those plans look like from Mr. Karp, to see what $325,000 would do and what $25,000 exactly would do on the Dewberry property. And I would also recommend that the savings, whatever they would be at the end of the project, if this were to move forward, would be moved direct to stay in public safety and move toward the 911 council to help make up for that $1.5 million shortfall that still exists from the budget. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Reynolds?
Yeah, a couple things. One is, first thing I want to do is I want to thank everyone that came out. I especially want to thank the firefighters. I know many of you personally. I've knocked on many of your doors. I grew up with some of you. I live by some of you, and I think I joined the chorus of tonight in saying that I think you do a fantastic job. I also want to thank the administration for that presentation. Before I ask a couple questions of Mr. Smith and Mr. Barkanik, I do want to correct a couple of things that have been said tonight. First of all, as it's been said many times tonight that when looking at council that we all voted to raise your taxes for the EMS facility, and which also appeared on a flyer that went out everywhere that made it seem as if we all did. And that was, as Mr. Evans just said, there was a plan that 5 of us supported. I was one of the ones that did not vote for it. The mayor didn't vote for it, so we can disagree all we want, but I do think that deserves to be said, is that not everybody here voted to raise the taxes for this plan. Also, there was the question before that came up, and the question about the casino revenue. And that's one that we all receive a lot. And I'm here to tell you that casino money went to pay for what it should have went to pay for. And quite honestly, that's increases in your salary, increases in our police salary. I know there was, when we first were awarded the casino several years back, it was suggested that we were going to be able to pay for those, pay for more firefighters and more police officers. We have added some police officers. At the same time, when you look at the numbers, and you look at the fact that before last year, before the 2011 budget, the city had not raised your property taxes in 2007, 2008, 2009, or 2010. Yet the public safety employee salaries, which you deserve, I'm here to, and I'm going to say it again, you absolutely deserve those increases. But that money, the question about where did the casino money go, it went to pay for approximately, by looking at these numbers, approximately $10 million in increase in salaries from 2006 to 2011. Once again, money you deserve. But we deal with the economy and we deal with everything else. So I do think it deserves to be said that it's not as if that money just disappeared somewhere. We didn't raise your taxes, the city did not raise your taxes from 2007 until 2010. So with those increases, once again deservedly so, that money needed to come from somewhere. And part of it did come from the host fee. And the last thing I want to say about that is that I know that there are people on city council and administration that you think and many of you don't consider as supporting public safety. I also want to go back about 4 years. After we awarded the casino, 2007, essentially 2 plans were floated about what to do with that money. One was look at spending more in public safety. And the other plan was keep half of the money and put half of the money back for tax relief. okay? At the time, that was very politically palatable. Some members of council, some members running for council at the time said that that was the way to go. But instead, and I wasn't on council at the time, so that's not credit that I deserve, but I know Mr. Maurer, Ms. Dolan, and Mr. Donches were all on council at the time, and we had our current mayor. And they together decided it was better for us to hold on to that than to give it back as part of tax relief. Because that money was designated as a host fee that was to go to the city, not the money that we get deducted from our school taxes. So once again, I think that, I know it's been a very emotional night, but I do just think that deserves to be said and that deserves to be mentioned, is that I know there's a lot of frustration, a lot of anger, and a lot of emotion. But there are people on this council and in this administration that supported those increases when they could have given them back in property tax relief and we wouldn't have been able to afford your increases. We wouldn't have been able to afford the police increases. We wouldn't have been able to afford the EMS increases. But when you look at the numbers in the last 5 years and you look at the salary increases, you're looking at almost $10 million, which is actually a little bit more than we got in the host fee. So once again, I thought it needed to be mentioned. Couple questions for you. Mr. Barkanek, I know you kind of talked about it before, but what are the reasons why this particular area, and I mean those pictures are pretty startling, but what are the reasons why those areas, even after they've built the new houses and they've built that area up in the last 45 years, why aren't there more fires in that area? Can you go to the microphone, please?
Yes. As you see, the difference in the last 35 years, what is it, 67 to 2000, 40 years. The houses are newer houses, the density isn't there. Like Ms. Dolan said, it's an upscale neighborhood. Those people are more likely to be, have smoke detectors, be proactive in fire safety. It's the only thing I can attribute it to. We have other areas where there aren't a lot of structure fires also, but this area is the one that has the overlap in coverage, and that's why it was chosen.
Okay, thank you. And that leads to my next question is, do you have a breakdown, and I know you might not have it at your hands, but this is something I think that council hasn't already received, if we could receive, is a breakdown by calls from the individual fire stations?
Yes.
Because I know that we've heard about the structural fires here in the last couple of years and this one, but I mean, we are not firefighters. So I mean, if you might be able to send us that information going forward, I think it would be helpful. Thank you. That's and my other question is for Mr. Carp. And I know you kind of went over it before, but could you just kind of summarize for me or for everyone in attendance here? I mean, the increase, we talked about the increase in costs, about how the bids came back more for the EMS center.
Right.
Can you, one thing that I know that, and I forget who it was, I'm not sure if it was Mr. Donches or Mr. Evans, someone had sent a memo to you several weeks back, or maybe a month or so ago, looking at the idea of maybe building I don't know if I want to say smaller, but maybe kind of adjusting some of the things about the new EMS facility, and whether or not that would be something that could fit that budget for what was assigned from the tax increase.
Okay. The current plan as it stands is for 10 bays to this new single station, with the intent that we're going to build a facility that will support the community's needs for quite a long time without any required additional expansion. The other beauty in this new large facility, is that we view it to be pretty much maintenance free for the first 10 plus years. It'll all be new construction. All the components will be under warranty. You won't be putting a new roof or windows and those sorts of things in the building. So it's something to be considered when you look at the overall operational cost of the building. Plus it'll be as energy efficient as we can build a new building today. So our cost to operate the facility would be probably, the cost to operate that facility would be comparable to operating a facility half the size that's dated. When we went into build the original building, we were looking at square footage. The original square footage for the proposed building was in the 10,000 square foot range. We thought that that would be sufficient as we went through design development with Mr. Smith and began to really understand the needs. I can't tell him how to run EMS, and that's not my thing. I know how to build buildings and run facilities, but as we went through design development and we looked at the needs of Mr. Smith and the operation in general, the building did grow in size for training purposes, for meeting HIPAA requirements, for data entry and those sorts of things, for proper quarters, for addressing male and female quarters, which we currently don't have at the current facility. So we had lots of things that came into play, and the building grew by a couple thousand square feet. Obviously, that impacted the bottom line, but we felt in the economy that we're in, knowing that we packed the house when we had our pre-bid meeting, we thought we would get some extremely aggressive numbers. The numbers were good. I mean, they are very good versus conventional construction, but not as good as we had hoped they would be. Can we pare the building down and build a smaller building? Certainly we can. We can build anything you'd like, but when we looked at the potential of moving the building closer to the street, that doesn't come without expense, because if we demoed that brick house there, there's an expense for that. There's an expense for removing the trees that are there. To put a building of the current proposed size on that site, it would require modifications to the golf course because it would interfere with the executive golf course. So the green would have to be relocated. There'd have to be proper buffers to the course to protect the new investment we'd be making in the building from golfers. So there are expenses involved with that. We would save money on utilities because the current building is set back from the road. So we'd save some money on running water and sewer and electric lines and things of that nature. But we'd also still have to maintain parking to the rear, just because the sheer footprint of the space available would make it difficult to shoehorn parking in for the employees and visitors. The building, if it was sized down, would probably not meet Gordon's needs, strictly because we couldn't probably provide him the training space that he'd like to see. And if we were to eliminate some of the other rooms that were proposed, he would have no space for his oxygen cascade system, his radio charging system, his communications. The boiler room would, I don't know where we'd put the furnace and those sorts of things. Can we redesign a smaller building? Absolutely. It's just a question of what the desires are moving forward. But just moving the building closer to the road wasn't without other expense.
Okay, thank you. And then just, I guess, one of the last things I will say, thank you, Mr. Carter. Thank you. One of the last things I would say is I did sit down with Mr. Smith, and no matter what happens, whatever ends up happening here, I think that it's just like, one of the great things about Bethlehem, and I know a lot, it's the situation with a lot of firefighters, a lot of people in this room, is that we're City of Bethlehem residents. And I don't know if I've ever met someone that is as passionate or as willing to spend as much time on the phone with you as Gordon is talking about EMS and his statistics and stuff. So I think I sat down with Gordon twice to talk about it, and I think it does deserve to be mentioned. It's like when I talked to Gordon about it, he explained to me why, what the reason for was, why he thinks it's a good idea, why he thinks it's a safe way to go if in fact the administration decides to go that way. And so then I think that any indication or inclination from other people that somehow Gordon was saying something he didn't believe. I've never known Gordon not to tell me exactly how it feels, even when it's something that I might not want to hear. So I think that anything other than that is actually kind of insulting. So once again, I want to thank Gordon for his honesty during this process, and I also want to thank everyone for coming out. And as I said, there's a lot of people in this room that deserve a lot of credit. This is an emotional decision going forward for the administration and council once the administration makes a decision. But at the end of the day, I know that I sleep better at night knowing that I live in a safe city. Thank you.
Mr. Mauer?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I probably have been around here longer than anybody in this room, except Joe Mauer. And one of the things I note is that change is inevitable. And it's never easy, and it's always painful. Our city is aging. There are now a bunch of old guys and gals like me that require more EMS. I live in Moravian Village, and I don't think there's a day goes by that I don't see one of the ambulances pull in. It's painful, but it's different. Very different than it was when I first came here. We're celebrating 911, if you call it. We're celebrating the people who have done wonderful things. I wasn't there on the day of 911, but a week later I was, and I was for 3 months as a chaplain, talking to firefighters like you guys, who went places that no one else in their right mind would have gone, except they were a firefighter. And firefighters do that. When there's an emergency that happens, they go. They don't think about their families, their own personal lives, or anything else. 911 has changed our whole way of looking at things. We have new departments at City Hall. Change is there, and it's not easy, and it's painful. And of course, one of the other factors that has changed is money. Not that when I was mayor that we had all the money we needed to do anything we want. But when I was at City Hall as mayor, we built the EMS station on Stepville Boulevard, which is also used by the Public Works Department. And now all of a sudden, it's not adequate. It doesn't meet the needs, and we have to do something differently. Change is painful. We're going through it. And frankly, I respect the mayor for looking at this and saying, maybe we have to look at it differently because things are different. Our whole approach to fighting fires is amazingly different. When I first came in, we didn't do much in prevention, fire air training. And then all of a sudden we had haphazard, what do you call it? HAZMAT. I knew I'd get something. That's changed too, because at my age I don't think as quickly as I once did. And I don't remember things all that I used to. But I admire the mayor for looking at this and saying we have to look at it differently. Not everybody's going to like it, but we're going to look at it differently. City council's going to have to make some decisions that won't be easy, and we can get emotional about it too. But I'm here to say I know change happens, and I'm ready to take a look at it freshly. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to try to maybe approach this a little bit of a different way, more of a historical option. I know I had the opportunity to meet with the mayor, commissioner, met with Ford Smith many times on this issue going back 10 years, but I think other than Mayor Maurer, I've been involved in this issue as a member of council probably more than anybody else. And I'll say very honestly that when I first heard of this, when I met with the mayor, I was not happy about the closing of Dewberry. I was certainly not happy about not constructing a new EMS facility. And Mr. Smith, you and I have discussed this issue for 10 years. We've talked about a new EMS facility. You've been a very strong advocate of a new EMS facility for 10 years. And as recently as 5 or 6 months ago, before the meeting with the mayor, you would keep me abreast of the designs of the building, and then things changed. And I do believe that, obviously no decision has been made. This is an administration decision, and if that decision is made, if it does change the dynamic, as Mr. Evans said, the EMS facility on Stepville has served us well for many years, but it's adequate. It's a building that's out of date, it's antiquated, and our call volume will be very close, maybe over 11,000 calls this year. And that's why for 10 years, Charlie Brown, God bless him, Mr. Smith and others, myself, and other members of council too, I should say, have always been advocates of a new EMS facility that would serve the public for the next 20, 25 years. And I was going through some of my notes, my file on EMS here, and it's amazing when I was looking at some of the locations that were discussed publicly in the paper and even through private correspondence. We were looking at the Easton Avenue facility with St. Luke's. There was even talk of building a new fire station in LVIP to cover the southeastern part of the city going back 2 years ago, and making that a combination fire station or an EMS, maybe a training facility. We even discussed over the years the possibility of a EMS facility out at the Rose Garden, even by Stockwell Station out on Caddy Road. There was even talk a few years ago, as you remembered, about Milham property, purchasing that and making that an EMS facility. And needless to say, the current Alex Mill Station. The bids did come in higher, and then it was rebid. I agree with that. And I guess it's around 1.7 million. And several members of council called the architect. I was one of them. And I want to give the architect the first credit. And I don't want to hold him strictly to his numbers because he answered the phone and the numbers were not in front of him, so I want to be very fair. But I asked him point blank, I said, can this building be downsized without doing anything major to the interior design of the building? And his comment was that he was surprised that the building almost was like, I don't want to use it, either not use this word, but more of an upscale EMS facility. And Gordon, you and I talked about what was going to be in this facility for years, and you kept me abreast of what was being discussed and what was going to be cut, etc., up until a few months ago. And he said to me, the architect that is, that he could probably cut one bay, because it's a pole building, and for future expansion, or he could cut the room to the rear, which would be a storage room, and then the bay could be used for storage unless you would have future expansion. And that could possibly save about $250,000. I asked him, is there anything else without going inside or redesigning the interior of the building? And he said that if you were to, as was alluded to before, if you were to demolish the golf house and move the building closer to Ellisville Road, the utility cost wouldn't be as great, and you could possibly save an additional $100,000, which would bring it to about $350,000. And Mr. Karp did respond to my memo, and I do appreciate his response and his comments. So, you know, City Council, we've discussed the issue, and the administration, and past administrations, we discussed this new facility for at least 10 years. And that was the reason, going back 10 months ago, that Councilman Evans proposed a dedicated tax increase for a new fire pumper and for the construction of an EMS facility. Frankly, I wish we would have this discussion 10 months ago if it was going to be talked about closing Dewberry, but that wasn't the case. And City Council did pass the tax increase. Mr. Reynolds is correct, 5-2. I voted 5-2. And that's where we're at today. And we have it's a dedicated tax. We have the money in a separate account, as was made reference to before. But if the administration closes Dewberry, as Mayor Bauer said, City Council will be faced with some difficult decisions. And one, and I'm not going to speak for members of council, but I said this, I'll just put it out on the table, is we may have to review, needless to say, what to do with the Dewberry building. And I would say this, if council were to move towards Stepco, and Dewberry. I think it would be critically important, if that's the consensus and the will of my colleagues, who I have great respect for. But I believe then that the two facilities should be completely renovated. Because frankly, I don't want to discuss a new paramedic facility for a long, long time. This is the opportunity that Mr. Smith wanted, a new EMS facility, and the dynamic may change. And as the administration said, it would cost possibly around $350,000 to renovate Stepco and to renovate possibly with a new bay in Dewberry. But I think then there's another question. What's the renovation to Easton Avenue Fire Station? Does that have to have a new bay? And if it does, if it has to have an addition, it should be discussed now, if that's the case. And I noticed in